Before we get started, I want to talk to you for a minute. We're going to figure out if racism caused college tuition, but also so much more than that. We're also going to get into how YouTubers like myself try to trick you into agreeing with them. We're going to get a little meta with this video. However, I need you to understand two very important details about this video essay. First and foremost, at no point am I going to lie to you in this entire video. Everything I say, from citation to historical description, will be correct. I need to make sure you understand this fully because it's vitally important as we continue. Secondly, and more importantly, all that being said, I'm not going to tell you the truth. I'll see you after the essay. After the Battle of Malvern Hill, where General George McClellan won a major battle against Lee's army of Northern Virginia, President Abraham Lincoln signed a law that would alter the course of higher education in the United States. The Morrill Land Grant Act of 1862 would allocate federal lands to the states for them to establish various colleges dedicated to the studies of agriculture and the mechanical arts. These schools would offer practical and free education for students in these specific fields. Some of these schools hold the label of this intent to this very day. Schools like Texas A&M, or as it was originally known, the Agriculture and Mechanical School of Texas, a scumbag university full of backwoods goat who wouldn't know their from a tea kettle and get a from the sight of livestock. Hook 'em. Few things get me going like a good old school rivalry. If you're wondering, that's what A&M stands for, Agriculture and Mechanical. They called these land-grant schools, but it wasn't just because of the plot of land that they put these schools on. Not only were these schools established, but it provided federal funding for them as well. During Reconstruction, the second Morrill Land Grant Act of 1880 further broadened the land and money grants and paid special attention to the fact that these schools in previous land grant acts were predominantly white. So the second Land Grant Act was offered for either integrated schools or segregated black schools to be established. This is where we get our HBCUs, or historically black colleges and universities, from. It targeted the former Confederate states, where, as it would be pretty obvious, the rampant systemic racism was still the order of the day. And once again, it was not just the land, but the federal funding for the operation of these schools. This boom was designed to assist the United States in the Industrial Revolution. Even in 1880, there was an understanding of the necessity to provide these equal opportunities to black citizens. Let's not get carried away, however, as even the Second Act didn't provide equal funding for these schools, simply just funding. So while it did provide for education for black students, it did so by allowing segregated schools to be produced. Either way, these land-grant schools offered education without tuition for almost 100 years. These schools contributed to the explosion in U.S. education, assisting in growing the United States from a regional power in the turn of the century to a dominant world power in the aftermath of World War II only 50 years later. Now, it must be said that this is not without other costs. While we can discuss the growth and benefits this education had to the U.S., you cannot ignore the fact of where the money came from. See, when we say land grant, you may think we're only talking about the land the schools were on. And we are discussing that. But also, there are direct links to the land being offered and indigenous land. And I know what some of you are thinking. Indigenous people own the entire country. It's all stolen land. Well, yes and no. As with most things, it's far more complicated than that. And I would advise listening to Native folks talk about this, as it's their issue and they're more knowledgeable about it. However, in this situation, we're not reaching for some obscure notion of who was here first. This is a situation where the government literally pushed people off the land in question, then proceeded to use the land for the land grants.
The first is that some of those colleges were built on land that had been occupied by American Indians prior to the act. These land-grant colleges were founded on appropriated land, and the history of that land is relatively easy to trace.
But that's not the whole story. The money that funded these schools came from the sale of other public land. As Professor Margaret Nash further points out,
This funding came to designated land-grant colleges no matter where they existed, and without any relationship to the land sold. That is, the land-grant college in the state of New York might receive the proceeds of public land sold in Montana. These land-grant colleges were funded by the sale of appropriated land.
So, We have these schools, which act as a boon to some and a curse for others. Either way, we have free tuition, right? Now when did that change? Well, it changed around the early 1970s. Okay, bear with me, I'm going to try something, and if you're squeamish or susceptible to jump scares, you may wish to look away. Reagan, Reagan, Reagan! That's right. Hero to the right, devil to the left, and confused older man who fell asleep while meeting the Pope, Ronnie Reagan shows up to the story. But wait, I hear some of you folks ask. He wasn't president in 1980. How did he affect student loans in the 1970s? Well, education is tricky. Due to the Constitution of the United States, specifically the 10th Amendment, saying, quote, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution or prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. We look to the enumerated powers clause of the Constitution." Where are those? Generally, Article 1, Section 8. Education is not listed there. As it is not enumerated, it's not under the purview of the federal government. But wait, the federal government makes tons of laws unrelated to the enumerated powers. Yeah, that's true. But that has to do with the Interstate Commerce Clause, and look, this video isn't about the Interstate Commerce Clause because at that point we'd had to talk about Gibbons versus Ogden of 1824, which stated that due to the Interstate Commerce Clause... Kimchi, this is not a video on the United States Constitution. So yeah, education is actually under individual state control. As such, it reaches back to what then Governor Reagan did when elected to office in 1966. See, California had something called the Master Plan for Higher Education in California, 1960, which stated rather unambiguously, quote,
"The two governing boards reaffirm the long-established principle that state colleges and the University of California shall be tuition-free to all residents of the state."
But just 6 years later, Reagan comes along and declares California schools should institute a tuition. Why, you ask? Well, ask Reagan, because he said, quote, "to get rid of undesirables." But it was actually one of the issues he ran his campaign on, specifically to, quote, "clean up the mess," end quote, at UC Berkeley. In May of 1970, Reagan had shut down all 28 UC and Cal State campuses. Now, he's campaigning in 1966 to put a tuition on state colleges that have historically been tuition-free. What happened right before, which might have influenced his political position? The Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was now the law of the land that African Americans had the same rights and could no longer be discriminated against by law. While it was not as clear-cut as it seems, the schools had a choice to either fight this in court or to establish an alternate way to keep certain undesirable folks out. Here comes the state school tuition. Truly, racism ruins everything, even education. Thanks for watching. Are you back? Pretty interesting, huh? It's like I said, nothing that was said during that essay was a lie. However, I didn't really tell you the whole truth either. Did college tuition start in the 1970s? Well, sort of. It did start around that time, but there were a lot of factors that went into its introduction. In 1944, FDR signed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. This is commonly referred to as the GI Bill. See, this bill set up a lot of the benefits that we see currently for veterans. Even though the bill ended in 1956, the benefits provided in that program have been made into the benefits package for veterans to this very day. Low-cost home mortgages, low-interest loans to start a business, and payment of tuition and expenses while attending colleges and universities. But why would that be necessary if colleges were free? Well, for one thing, there are more expenses associated with going to university than simple tuition, and tuition was also a consideration. What this did was flood U.S. higher education with people. 7.8 million veterans used their education benefits, with 2.2 million going to colleges or universities, and 5.6 going to vocational schools or training programs. This all included a boom in civil participation, rise in the middle class, and long-term economic growth. All because of a bill that had the government provide the educational, financial, and housing benefits to regular citizens. FDR, certified socialist. It's funny, the good old days were sparked in large part by socialist programs. not by bootstraps. Anyway, this put an increased strain on the United States higher education system, and the administrators of these schools started seeing dollar signs. But additionally, the rise in student protest led to the conservative politicians becoming wary of the entire system. See, when you mix the civil rights protests with Vietnam War protests of the 1960s, you start to see real change in the demeanor of the political sphere. When I mentioned Reagan previously, the undesirables he was talking about weren't necessarily POC. They were protesting students. It was mainly about the leftist element in colleges. Reagan stated that his proposal for tuition, quote,
"Well, this resulted in the almost hysterical charge that this would deny educational opportunities to those of the most moderate means. This is obviously untrue. Well, we made it plain that tuition must be accompanied by adequate loans to be paid back after graduation."
Because saddling poorer students with debt right off the bat made sure that we were all in the same playing field. Additionally, Roger Freeman, advisor to Reagan, stated in a press conference in 1970, quote,
"We are in danger of producing an educated proletariat. That's dynamite. We have to be selective on who we allow."
So what factors went into college tuition? Millions of GIs going to schools, schools realizing they could be profitable, a conservative backlash to student protests, the Cold War, and a little sprinkling of racism. And to be honest, there's probably more. But stating something so simple, like racism caused college tuition, while provocative, is ultimately not true. So why do we gravitate to this? Well, that's what we're actually talking about today. Let's dive into YouTube, echo chambers, and how the US education system is leaving you unable to realize you're being duped.
Ladies and gentlemen.
1970s and 1980s. In reality, MSG is basically just a salt low kind of vegetable seaweed extract.
A true thing, badly expressed, is a lie. Stephen Fry. Chapter 1. What do you call the person who came in last at med school? You don't know who I am. You don't know what my educational background is, what degrees or licenses I do or do not have. I can tell you that I graduated from a prestigious 4-year university, top 10 public school in the United States, where I got a degree in political science and a minor in psychology. I can tell you that I graduated from a private law school in the state of Texas and have been licensed as an attorney for 10 years at time of recording. But you don't really know that for sure, do you? And while I can assure you that those facts are true, you kinda have to trust me on that. I could show you my degree or my license, but I'm not going to do that and dox myself. I like keeping my private life private. I have a family. You may believe the things I tell you. Maybe it's because I own so many suits or I speak eloquently. But in truth of fact, you have no idea. YouTube is full of academic fraudulence. Recently, a big stir was caused because of a prominent YouTuber calling out a few other prominent YouTubers for plagiarism. These allegations appeared to be true. This sort of thing happens all the time, though not always showcased on a large platform like the one Bomber guy has. But let's look at those big three of the current leftist video essay space. Now, I will state the following using very lawyerly language. I'm not actually questioning the credentials of any of these people. I just wanted to highlight the nature of online credentials overall. ContraPoints has, allegedly, a degree in philosophy from Georgetown University. Abigail Thorne allegedly has a degree and a master's degree in philosophy from the University of St. Andrews. Bomber guy has some sort of a degree from this university. Look, it's Welsh, and I don't even know where to begin with the pronunciation. Aberystwyth University?
It's Aberystwyth University. Yeah.
What about these educational backgrounds qualify them for their position as the three biggest left-wing video essayists? The short answer is nothing. Even accepting their credentials as true, there isn't much on their educational paperwork that makes them special. Now, to be clear, there isn't anything on my educational paperwork that makes me special either. It's like the old joke. Do you know what they call the person who came in last at med school? Doctor. But it's not like we're talking about Neil deGrasse Tyson here. The talents of these three are not in their pure expertise in the field. It's in their presentation. Francis Fukuyama isn't sporting latex in a video and making jokes at the same time. And neither am I. I'm sorry, that's just not happening. I have no interest in it. I apologize. I told you all I'm super boring. This is about as special as I can get right now. Now, academic qualifications by themselves aren't the entire picture. And don't get me wrong, I understand on a personal level that academic credentials do not equate to having a great mind. The world of higher education is driven mostly by elitism, relationships, and nepotism more than merit. It's funny to me that since starting this YouTube channel, I actually have a cavalcade of professors in history or international relations that would be happy to give me recommendations to pursue more higher education. When I was thinking about applying to grad school in 2006, I couldn't get a single professor to consider writing me one. I went to law school partially because I didn't see a way to get into grad school. And I knew some attorneys who were willing to write me letters of recommendation, even if I couldn't get a professor to do it at the time. That being said, we cannot be so anti-intellectual to throw the baby out with the bathwater. As it stands, academic accomplishments are some of the better indicators of a person's expertise. It is in these areas where you learn the skills that would actually help in writing essays like the ones you see on this website. But if we look at the skills earned and where one actually requires those skills, you start to see a clearer picture. Let me give you an example from my real life. There was a woman sitting in a conference room. She had jeans and a t-shirt on. She was looking really nervous. Her eyes were darting all over the place, trying to focus on the bland office decorations we had in the room. The boring paintings purchased from some department store, a water carafe, and glasses laid out in front of her, a tripod conference call speaker in the middle of the desk. She was there for something she was unfamiliar with. She was being sued. That word puts a lot of fear into people. She was about to be deposed. That's where an attorney interrogates you with questions and actively tries to trip you up. They use confusing words and circular sentences to get you to admit fault without actually admitting fault. I've actually done this so much that my uncle asked me to act like I was deposing him about a recent car accident he had. He went into the exercise knowing he wasn't at fault. He left the exercise questioning whether or not he owed the other guy money. So this woman is stressed in an unknown situation she's completely unprepared for. And on top of that, in a strange place she's never even heard of before. I walk into the room, smile at her, and say hello. She meekly said hello back. She's wringing her hands, attempted a little smile back to me. I was her attorney. I'm the guy that's supposed to help her out of this situation. I asked her if this was the first time she'd ever been deposed, and she said yes. Then I said, me too. Her eyes went wide. I could see the panic set in. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I've been doing this for years. Finally said, letting out the tension in the room. She let out a big breath of clutched air that was stuck in her lungs. I'm an awful human being. Just terrible. The prospect of someone, even with the education and the license, but lacking the experience, helping this woman with her deposition was terrifying to her. Thankfully, at that point, I had years under my belt. To me, this was routine. To her, it was monumental. And that was a car accident case that would cost her exactly $0, worst case scenario. Her insurance might have gone up to cover the cost. Maybe her premiums would go up a few bucks a month, but nothing extreme. Not for that simple fender bender. That's how people feel when the stakes are low. What about when you're trying to inform them yourself of something important, like a major political issue, or whether or not someone's experiences are valid? These are issues that are forming our society. The history or way certain systems work in our world, government, schools, the legal system. The viewers of these essays tend to run young, high school and college-age students trying to learn more and expand their worldview. There's a duty there a responsibility to be accurate, to have a certain professional rigor, and that duty is not clearly defined or regulated in any way. We are simply people in front of a camera speaking into a microphone. There is nothing that distinguishes me aside from my ability to edit videos. And there are instances where the knowledge of the subject matter is the whole difference between understanding and hatred. I like to think of something that I mentioned in my CRT video about how so many people misunderstood Derek Bell's mental exercise of making a hypothetical alternative decision for Brown versus the Board of Education. They construed it as pro-segregation. That isn't true. You really just need to know the entire context to understand what he's doing. I've seen another example of that outside of my area of expertise. If only I knew a professor of gender history that could explain it. Wait, I do know a professor. Trooper? Lecture me.
All heterosexual sex is rape! That's what radical feminist Andrea Dworkin said. Or maybe it was Catherine McKinnon. Well, who cares? One way or another, feminists are scary, am I right? Wait, let's back up. Who are Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon? Dworkin was a feminist philosopher and activist. McKinnon is a constitutional law professor and one of the reasons we have workplace sexual harassment laws. Why would they say something as alienating as all heterosexual sex is rape? Well, they never said it. So what did they say? In a 1995 interview, when asked if she said all heterosexual sex was rape, Dworkin replied, quote, "No, I wasn't saying that, and I didn't say that then or ever. My point was that as long as the law allows statutory exemption for a husband from rape charges, no married woman has legal protection from rape. I also argued, based on a reading of our laws, that marriage mandated intercourse. It was a compulsory part of the marriage contract. Under the circumstances, I said, it was impossible to view sexual intercourse in marriage as the free act of a free woman." End quote. A TLDR version of this part of Dworkin's argument can be summed up in this question she once asked. If I cannot have my no respected, can I meaningfully consent to sex? End quote. People who defend Dworkin nowadays will often focus on this quote and say, she wasn't talking about all sex. Really, she was just talking about marital rape laws. And in case you don't know about those, up until the 1970s, rape laws exempted a married man from prosecution if the woman he raped was his wife. But, that was over 50 years ago, so we don't have to think about it now, right? Well, it wasn't until the 1990s, due in part to the work of feminists like Dworkin and McKinnon, that marital rape became criminalized in all U.S. states, though even then, marital rape was often treated differently than non-marital rape. It often had a higher burden of proof, maybe requiring brandishing a weapon or a greater level of violence. Even then, when it was prosecuted, it was often treated as a lesser crime with shorter sentences and shorter reporting periods. And to this day, there are still states that treat marital rape as a less serious crime than rape outside of marriage. So, if they didn't say it, where did the idea come from anyway? It came from Playboy magazine and Rush Limbaugh, who in 1986 both called for Dworkin and McKinnon to be stopped. But stopped from what? The mid-'80s was an important moment in the history of pornography. While the private possession of pornography had been legalized in 1969, the porn industry was still fighting to decriminalize the production of pornography so they could make movies without the police arresting them for prostitution and pandering. Dworkin and McKinnon were part of an anti-pornography counter-movement that argued pornography added to the objectification and oppression of women. It was right as they were gaining momentum that Playboy and others started spreading the all sexes rape lie. What better way to discredit your detractors than to paint them as uptight and delusional women who just don't like sex? But, the fundamental question that Dworkin and McKinnon focused on in their work was not marital rape or even pornography. Rather, how does living in a society that naturalizes inequality impact our experience of sexuality? Dworkin noted of the attacks she'd received, quote, "If one's sexual experience has always and without exception been based on dominance, not only overt acts but also metaphysical and ontological assumptions, how can one read my book? The end of male dominance would mean, in the understanding of such a man, the end of sex. If one has eroticized a differential in power that allows for force as a natural and inevitable part of intercourse, how could one understand that this book does not say that all men are rapists or that all intercourse is sex? Equality in the realm of sex is an anti-sexual idea if sex requires dominance in order to register as sensation. McKinnon, for her part, wrote that she was attacked fundamentally because she argued simply that, quote, sexuality occurs in a context of gender inequality, end quote. And, maybe that we should think about how that impacts us. Considering a recent survey found that 1/3 of teen boys look up to self-described misogynist and alleged sex trafficker Andrew Tate, maybe we should grapple with the challenge Dworkin and McKinnon actually gave us to ponder how inequality impacts our sexuality, rather than just stick with the easily dismissible, context-free feminist thinks that all sex is rape, which is something they never said.
Learn something new every day. The only thing that actually holds us to that standard is ourselves. We are a self-regulating body as video essayists on this platform. And when, in the history of the world, has that ever worked? That's why you see so much graft in this space. That's why plagiarists and frauds can permeate, because it doesn't matter if someone is correct, or their analysis is on point, or their opinions have merit. What matters is if their video gets views, if their thumbnails are provocative, if they're entertaining. And entertaining is not a great metric for the truth. What you can expect to get with this metric is an entertaining fool. The disappointment you see in so many aspects of your life are related to this problem. Why are your political candidates so constantly disappointing? Why is the news geared towards the Tucker Carlsons and Rachel Maddows of the world? Why Joe Rogan has the biggest podcast on the planet? Even he would say he isn't the brightest, most knowledgeable guy in the room, much less the medium. Think about your favorite YouTubers. You may tell yourself you watch them because they're very knowledgeable, or they're experts in their field. But in reality, there's probably some other YouTuber who's better at all aspects of the subject matter, but isn't actually entertaining to watch. We don't watch Bill Nye because he's a research scientist. He isn't one. He has a degree in engineering. We watch him because he's been doing stand-up comedy and sketch shows since 1978 and honed the skills of presentation. We don't watch Hank Green because he's a research scientist. We watch him because he wrote a popular blog and decided to run a YouTube channel with his author brother where he honed his skills at presentation. And you don't watch me because of my educational background either. I'm just a mildly entertaining guy who has a law degree because he didn't think he could make it as an actor in Hollywood. That is the truth of why we watch who we do. But then again, what is true is what we want to be true. Chapter 2. My judgment is true, for I am not alone in it. When I was making my statements on racism being the cause of college tuition, some of you had a click in your mind, as it all seemed to fall into place. Others probably balked at the statement. Don't be too proud if you called it out as being false. First of all, it isn't entirely false. Secondly, it likely wasn't your superior intellect or reasoning capabilities that allowed you to come to the correct conclusion. You just happen to be on the correct side of a confirmation bias coin flip. It catches all of us. All of us. All of us. No one is immune. It's part of the reason you should question the opinions of anyone presenting research online, including me. This is something I experience in the real world as part of my job every day. It's something that my coworkers and I would use all the time. So, back when I was a trial attorney,
Allegedly.
My old boss and mentor told me how to go about trying a case. He would say, "Son, you gotta begin with the jury charge, and you work your way back." The jury charge is what, at least in the United States court system, is given to the jury as instructions, definitions, and most importantly, the question that needs to be answered. What question? Well, the "did they commit the crime" question, for instance. He told me, once you understand a question, and how the jury is informed of the definitions and such, you could then roadmap how you'd get the jury to answer how you want them to. You're laying down the proper foundation. Then you could go into voir dire and know who to pick. Voir dire, or voir dire as we say in Texas courts, is jury selection. See, when you know where you want the jury to end up, you start looking for folks predisposed to come to that conclusion. While we didn't call this out by name, we were trying to use bias to our advantage. Bias, and confirmation bias specifically, has such a hold on all of us. As Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt states in her book, Bias, which legitimately brought me close to crying on multiple occasions while reading it,
the process of making these connections is called bias. It can happen unintentionally. It can happen unconsciously. It can happen effortlessly. And it can happen in a matter of milliseconds. These associations can take hold of us no matter our values, no matter our conscious beliefs, no matter what kind of person we wish to be in the world.
In fact, our environment affects us in such powerful ways. There is a trend in social media spaces to curate your own space. I do it. I have to be careful of how much I read comments in my more contentious videos because people will say some wild things in there that are just weird to me. However, when you create a space where everyone is saying the same thing all the time, you get acclimated to that. Regardless of the truth of the matter, you will start to believe it. Imagine you join a police force, and every day, from all angles, you hear folks talking about how black people perpetuate crime. Even if you are black yourself, you will start to internalize that bias. If your lived experience is constantly reinforcing that idea, regardless of its merit, you will start believing it, even if unconsciously. As Dr. Eberhardt puts it,
it's implausible to believe that officers or anyone else can be immersed in an environment that repetitively exposes them to categorical pairing of blacks with crime and not have the effect of how they think, feel, or behave.
Confirmation bias is the name of the phenomenon known throughout human history, but coined in the 20th century to discuss how folks interpret or seek evidence that is in line or support their existing beliefs. As Raymond Nickerson pointed out,
people are more likely to question information that conflicts with pre-existing beliefs than information that is consistent with them, and are more likely to see ambiguous information to be confirming of pre-existing beliefs than disconfirming of them.
What we're trying to utilize in courts were restrictions of attention to a favored hypothesis. We did this by creating stories. Say what you will about the ending of Game of Thrones. The speech Tyrion gave about stories being powerful has some weight. Multiple studies have shown that story construction is a central component of a jury's decision-making process. In fact, when researching jurors, researchers Kuhn and Flatten found, quote,
many subjects showed inappropriately high certainty regarding their verdict choices, raising the question of how they construe the juror task. In our argument research, many of these same subjects saw complex questions, such as why prisoners return to crime, as having single certain answers.
Stories and our biases have a tendency to reduce the complex to the simple. With the example of the racism intuition, there was a confluence of multiple issues that hit at the same time. But if you want to make an argument about racism, you have your simple response. We love a simple response. As attorneys, we would play on people's desires for that simplicity. I've worked on cases of securities fraud, contract disputes, car accident cases, workplace accidents, and horse attacks. And that last one was really gross. Folks, you got to be real careful around horses. Anyway, these are complex cases with a lot of different issues happening at once. But when we display our evidence, depose the folks involved, or question them on the stand, we don't just try to present the jury with the total picture and let them make an objective decision. We're crafting a story. We're molding their reaction. One of the most damning bits of evidence against the objectivity of our justice system is the fact that attorneys are needed, and that the amount of money you spend on your attorney substantially affects your guilt or innocence. If the facts are the facts, then why does it matter how skilled an attorney is? Or an online debater, for that matter? Debate, trial, these things are not about facts or reason. They're about rhetoric and storytelling. And anyone who says otherwise is either ignorant or a liar. And the facts don't matter in YouTube video comment sections either. Take this for instance. This one is in my bioessentialism video. This was a video where I tried to point out how certain tropes have racist origins and can perpetuate stereotypes. Seemed like a strong response. Or this one, from my CRT video. Now, do you remember when I said that in the video? Because I don't. Never even came close to saying that. A few weeks ago, I saw a person post on social media about a soccer player, or footballer, for my international audience, who was suspended for what the newspaper headline said was, supporting Palestine. While this other person reposted that message without a second thought, my brain twitched. That seemed odd. So I decided to dig in. Most articles make vague allusions to the statements made by the athlete. Some said anti-Semitic, some said supporting Palestine, others said supporting terrorism. But few actually reported what was said. To add to the confusion, 2 separate soccer players were suspended at the same time for seemingly the same thing. One was supporting Palestine and reposted a message that included the phrase, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Some people interpret that phrase to be anti-Semitic. He refused to apologize. This is Anwar El Ghazi, and his contract with his team was terminated. He's pursuing legal action. The other one was just the subject of the post. That footballer posted a message that called for God to send a black day for the Jews. That footballer apologized for his comment. It took me a few minutes to get to the bottom of either one of those stories. The person who reposted the story about the player being suspended for supporting Palestine saw the story that matched their experiences and biases and reposted it. And here's the thing. Much like the example of the racism intuition, it's a coin toss. One footballer was suspended for reposting something simply supporting the Palestinian cause. The other was suspended for reposting something that called for attacks on Jewish people worldwide. I'm a paranoid person, so I'm generally suspicious of those types of headlines. But my mentality of, it can't be true, and this other person's mentality of, it's obviously true, were both correct and incorrect at the same time, depending upon which soccer player we were talking about. I'm showcasing this not to pat myself on the back, but to show you the lack of accuracy either way for the bias. The bias doesn't care whether you're correct or incorrect. The bias only cares if the evidence supports your bias. It's such a powerful force that I wonder about the efficacy of video essays that I make. Do people agree with me because they were predisposed to agree with me? Do they disagree with it due to the weakness of my presentation, or because they were predisposed to disagree? The one thing that makes me lean towards confirmation bias is that not many people have articulated really good arguments against the arguments I make in my videos yet. Like, I could make better counter-arguments to the ones in my own video. People really need to step their game up. Chapter 3. So where's the Cannes Film Festival being held this year? Christina Aguilera. I had a law professor,
Allegedly,
who in my criminal law class once stated that there were 4 essential elements to a crime, then listed 3 of them, then meandered about something else for about 30 minutes. It was an excruciating class. Everything I learned about criminal law came from my readings, study guides, or my bar prep classes because I did not learn a thing from these lectures. Now, I'm not going to name names, even though he did pass away a few years ago. His class was awful. He had been teaching criminal law for almost 40 years, been the author of a criminal law guide for almost 30 years, and he was an awful teacher. How much weight can you put into something that he said about criminal law? A lot because of his experience? Or a little because I never got the final element of the crime from him? It was causation, by the way. That was the element he never actually got around to talking about. Let's say, for example, I was to use a quote from Henry Kissinger as evidence to support my position on an international relations issue. Would you put a lot of weight into that because he was the former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State of the United States? He was the top diplomat for the U.S. between 1973 and 1977. He's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He's an Army veteran, a Harvard graduate with honors, with a master's and a PhD from Harvard as well. On paper, he is one of the most credentialed people to discuss international relations. He was also a bit evil, and in my opinion, not a great diplomat. You may have a well-formed opinion of Kissinger, though. I'm assuming many of you have heard of him and know enough to form an opinion of him. But earlier in this essay, I quoted Raymond Nickerson. He's a professor at Tufts University and a fellow at all these organizations, and is the author of 9 books on psychology. You have no idea who that is. He could be Mussolini in a Red Sox jersey, and you'd have no idea. By the way, he passed away in 2022, And you didn't know that either. I referred to him in the present tense. Hey, you may be pulling your phone out right now to fact check if he actually died. He did. He was apparently religious, and his family set up a foundation with his money to give grants to disabled people to go to school. But how many of your favorite YouTubers know the details of the people that they're quoting? My knowledge is varied, depending upon the topic, and even then, it can get more complicated. In a previous video, I recommended John Mearsheimer's book, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, and discussed his theory of offensive realism. While I do have issues with the theory, I was recommending it more for the use in tabletop situations rather than in actual practice. It's a solid theory and a pillar of various schools of thought. It has a titanic impact on how governments operate and is so influential, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy in the world of international relations. But there are these two big issues that come up with my recommendations of this book and the theory. First, the fact that I referred to it as a solid theory probably got some folks' hair to tickle on the back of their neck. See, as with any subject, folks like to think of things like international relations theory like team sports. You support one, they denounce the other, and if you show any consideration to the theory's points, they think of you as ignorant, or in some cases, evil. We'll get into this concept a little bit more later, so let's hold off on that for now. Secondly, John Mearsheimer likes to get on TV. As such, he will occasionally say things that are really weird to get on TV and use that and his sizable reputation to get paid to speak on TV. There's a huge gap between TV punditry and well-thought-out academic work. But, as of writing this script, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics is still the #1 best-selling book on international relations on Amazon, partly because it's still used as a textbook to teach these classes in universities across the country and the world. He is still one of the rock stars of academic international relations study. I guess most of you had never heard of him before. No, I know you've heard of him before. We're all in awe of your knowledge. I'm speaking to the rest of the class. But knowing the reputations of people quoted in the fields that they're in is something you might gather over time, or figure out through your expertise in that field. We're trying to supplement that by looking people up, but what we would really need is a tool like one we have in the legal field. In the United States legal profession, we have tools that we use to research cases. See, it used to be like these law libraries, like the ones you see on legal TV shows, folks poring over these books trying to find the right case and proves the law is on their side. Then they present the other side with a paper that shows the proof and get the desired outcome, make a snarky comment at the shocked opposition, screen goes dark, credits roll, happy ending. Suits is available for streaming on Netflix in the US. Suffice to say, this is First of all, no one uses books anymore. We have computer databases. What is this, the 70s? Do you want to pay me $350 an hour to pore over books the entire day, or do you want me to type in a search query? Bleh. Do you want to pay me $350 an hour to pore over books for an entire day, or do you want me to type a search query and get the answer in 6 minutes or less? 6 minutes isn't as arbitrary as you think. Lawyers who bill by the hour measure time in 1/10 of an hour, or 6 minutes. It's the smallest measurement of time we can bill you for. And when you look up a case in something like Westlaw, my old firm used this one, you can see the details of the case, read the description, and get flags and categories that apply to it. You see a yellow flag? That means the case has distinguished itself from this one and a slightly different outcome was had. See a red flag? The case had overturned something about that case. It'll even go into detail and tell you what is the most negative case. You can see if your research is something that'll hold up in court or not. See if another case has contradicted your case, and how. But YouTubers don't have that tool. There isn't a quick or easy way for video essayists to research whether the paper they just reviewed holds weight, or it's been disproven by another experiment. Heck, there isn't even a central body like a court system that arbitrates what is or is not a correct theory or conclusion. But this is related to the previous chapter as well. Because if I were to say that Kissinger's book on diplomacy has something interesting or some important ideas about how countries interact, then you might dismiss those ideas because they came from Kissinger. Or some of you might overvalue the ideas because they came from someone you like Karl Marx. like Karl Marx or Thomas Hobbes. We use these names as an appeal for authority, but their authority is based largely on where you sit on the political spectrum. It's seen as fruit from the poison tree. If this dirtbag person who is objectively evil and bad said something, it must be wrong. This is the inverse of the argument from authority logical fallacy, specifically the ad hominem. But let's say you find an essayist that you respect. They're entertaining. You seem knowledgeable. You trust their academic rigor. That's the dream, right? I can just consume this video and I will be more knowledgeable. Or more charitably, more knowledgeable than I was before. Then I can just spit out what the essayist told me to. I'm their fan. I support them on Patreon. Their opinions are now my opinions. I don't need to have analytical skills to be a YouTube viewer. I wasn't even taught how to watch things analytically. Chapter 4. A genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus. Martin Luther King Jr. Here's a speech in the 1973 movie The Paper Chase that echoes in the minds of every law student that has entered school since its release. The Paper Chase is essential viewing for law students prior to their first day of class. While you may not find it on any syllabus, it will nonetheless be recommended to you. The movie and the novel it was based on depict the first year law students experience at Harvard Law. We refer to these students as 1Ls. The 1L curriculum is nearly identical at every law school in the United States. Torts, civil procedure, contracts, real property law, criminal law, constitutional law, legal research and writing. These are the pillars of legal study. The very mention of these courses will either ring nostalgia or dread among attorneys. Penoyer versus Neff, International Shoe, names that mean nothing to most of you, and instill dread to this day into some of you. The movie features a titanic performance by the late great John Houseman as Professor Kingsfield, the main character's first encounter with a law professor. In the contracts class, Professor Kingsfield delivers this speech explaining to the students about how law schools use the Socratic method. I can tell you from experience, even as a person who has spoken in rallies with thousands in attendance in front of the Texas state capitol, who has performed on stage, who has done competitive speaking on the state and national level, nothing prepares you for the fear and intensity of being called on as a 1L in a class and then badgered with questions in this manner. It is anxiety, distilled and potent. As the speech goes on, Professor Kingsfield explains, in doing this, you learn to analyze, to think on your feet. Famously, the professor states in closing, "You enter this class with a skull full of mush, and you leave thinking like a lawyer." It's a brutal way to gain an education. You have to think creatively, consider different points, respond dynamically. It teaches you that in the law there is no right answer. You are not there to learn the law, to memorize. The reason for this is you are responding to questions made on the spot, and your answer helps form the next question. The professor is testing that you read the case, yes, but more that you understood the issues at play. The professor sometimes even alters the facts of the case and asks you how you would respond differently because of that change. It teaches you to look at things from all angles, to understand your opponent's position, not just to disagree. Not to think that they're wrong and you're right, but how you could be right if you were in their position. Now, it's better now than it was back in the 70s. Or at least, it was 14 years ago when I was a 1L.
Allegedly.
There's more of a mix of the Socratic method and other methods of teaching the law. But the end goal is the same. As with any style of teaching, it isn't for everyone. If you're like me, who doesn't mind public speaking and have a knack for communicating extemporaneously, you're probably fine. If you're the type that freezes when speaking publicly or has a hard time working through things purely mentally, it may be awful for you. Different styles work for different folks. I don't recommend the Socratic method for everyone, but I feel like it really worked for me. It's this thinking, this training I bring to my essays. But I worry not only that many video essayists don't bring the same level of analysis into their essays, but that their audiences don't either. And believe me, I've seen the lack of those skills on display. I was recently watching 2 video essays from folks with much higher subscriber counts than I have, and put out a video with just abhorrent analysis. They both have done good videos before, but these videos were specifically lacking, not in citations or research per se, but in quality analysis. One of them had the central premise that's a clickbait darling to the online left. It's where you take a basic concept or social idea, like relationships, movies, or whatever, and then take one of the standard antagonists of the online left, like patriarchy, capitalism, or white supremacy, and then you make this leap or stretch a concept so far to show that X is impossible or ruined by Y. Mix in some Gen Z online humor, spit out drivel. It was nonsense. Stretching concepts so hard you could use them as a drum. Now, there are clear links between the ills we face in this world that have origins in real terrible ideas, but it makes it difficult when you point to an issue that has existed in every culture in the world and then blame white supremacy. Or you take a concept that has existed for literal millennia and say that it was caused by capitalism, which in its modern form has only been around for a few hundred years. Side note, yes, I understand that capitalist activities and antecedent ideas to capitalism have existed in the current world, but that wasn't the argument being made in the video in question. I'm not here to point figures or send a hate mob to any creators. They aren't doing anything evil or unethical, just foolish. Or, in the other case, the person wanted to dismantle a theory proposed by someone in the empirical political science world. Now, that's my wheelhouse. And I don't like that theory either. So I was ready for a good video. But then the analysis devolved into a very basic attack on the theory that showcased a misunderstanding of not only the theory, but the field of study that the theory was based on. Have you ever had someone agree with you, but when you asked them why, they give you an answer that almost changes your mind in the other direction because it was so bad? Yeah. That. It gave me an actual headache. I had a physical response to how bad this video essay was. And there were critiques to the video in the comments, but that gets you nowhere. Again, I don't want to identify these creators. It'd probably help this video go viral if I went into a specific minute-by-minute breakdown of their videos and pointed out all the things they got wrong. But guess what? I'm not that guy. I'm hopeful that you, dear audience, is a little bit more mature. I'm trusting you with this, with the eagerness to learn the lesson for the lesson's sake. Plus, sometimes I know these people. I like these people. And my issue isn't with them per se, it's with how YouTube and the audience operates. It's dangerous to receive ideas without thinking. It's why in math class you learn how to do the problem and show your work. Why that is just as important as getting the correct answer, because you have to understand how you got to the answer to really grasp the subject. However, especially in the United States, we've been training our students not to learn or to be creative, but to answer a test correctly. And sadly, many non-educators think that those are not different things. I was a student in Texas during the tenure of then Governor Bush. His education reforms in the state were the foundational ideas for the controversial No Child Left Behind bill. Now, there's a lot we can get into with regards to these reforms, both positive and negative, but I just wanted to touch on one specific thing. One of the big pushes for these reforms were discussions on accountability and measurable results for students' education. This brought about the massive and ubiquitous use of standardized testing as the ultimate metric of a quality education. And to that end, it affected the opposite result. What do we want people to learn? It's the basic foundational question of education. I don't care as much about regurgitating facts, dates, and formulas as I do the ability to think. As American educator and lecturer Alfie Kohn states,
standardized tests can't measure initiative, creativity, imagination, conceptual thinking, curiosity, effort, irony, judgment, commitment, nuance, goodwill, ethical reflection, or a host of other valuable dispositions and attributes.
We are teaching a generation of people to no longer think, but to memorize. If you did well on standardized tests, like I did as a child, you were probably applauded as intelligent. Putting aside the debate on what intelligence even is, because even the folks who made the IQ test don't understand what they're testing for, that may make you feel really good. I've seen TikToks talking about what it's like to be a 30-year-old who was in a gifted and talented program at school, where they put all the smart kids. Well, I was in those programs. I tested very well. Throughout my childhood, I heard the praise. What a smart kid. Look at those glorious test scores. You want to know something? It's all garbage. The actual research says something completely different. Studies of elementary, middle school, and high school students have all found a statistical association between high scores on standardized testing and relatively shallow thinking. That's right, folks. You take your intellectual elitism and stick it where the books don't go. You were made into a machine with machine thinking. Think about any time you saw Twitter discourse, if we can even call it that, or any other discourse. It's a lot of folks who claim to be right, make their 14 tweets about how they are right and how everyone else is wrong. And we don't like compromise. Compromise is a negative term. Compromise your beliefs. Compromise your morals, etc. To not toe the party line is to not be a true member of the group. The entirety of the internet is an absolute minefield of absolutes. Have you ever wondered why? Why people take these all or nothing stances all the time? Why politicians are raked over the coals every time they bend on an issue? Why this or that Twitter account will declare someone as an abuser or fascist or communist or groomer or whatever over a single statement? Because our brains have been conditioned to think that there are 4 options and one of them is correct. Check box. Fill the bubble. A, B, C, D. What does that do to a young mind?
The right answer focus of standardized testing also means that all the problems were chosen precisely because they have unambiguously correct solutions, with definite criteria for determining what those solutions are, and clear techniques for getting there. The only thing wrong with these problems is that they bear no resemblance to most problems in the natural or social sciences that occupy people in the real world.
We are all falling victim to the same mental trap. We all know the answer is C. And those who answer A are evil. Those who answer B are well-meaning but uninformed. And those who answer D are just impractical. You've all seen this. Many of you participated in this, and some of you, in the comments, will remark about how this issue or that issue does actually fit into a nice Manichaean dichotomy. So sure of your self-righteousness. I've done it. But the older I get, and the more I think about it, the less sure I become. Because the world has shown me time and time again that there isn't a simple solution for the problems we face in this world. I see them on social media all the time, sometimes promoted by people I love and respect. Sometimes promoted by me. This is the solution. That would never work. Israel and Palestine, the economy, politics, in any country, poverty, wealth inequality, racism. Some of the greatest minds of our species have pondered these problems and come up with different solutions. I think about Derek Bell and all his uncertainty at the correct way of solving racism in the United States. I think about how different economic theorists debate endlessly what system provides the best benefit for the population. I think about how various doctors will debate the treatments of ailments, police reform or abortion. Name a topic, I'll give you 4 experts with 7 opinions. But most of all, you have to break through the barriers constructed by your conditioning. Discard the notion that every problem has a set solution. Understand that not everyone has malicious intent. And try to seek out not just knowledge, but the ability to learn, to analyze, to critique. And be wary of those who would tell you that they have the only right answer. Final. Righteousness cannot be born until self-righteousness is dead. Bertrand Russell. Sometimes I wonder what I'm doing here. I try to raise awareness on issues in tabletop gaming, talk about the law so folks understand what's going on, discuss history. I actually try to look at things in a nuanced way, indicating where my own biases are when I recognize them, but nobody's perfect. I'm genuinely concerned if I do a video outside of the area that I have a certain level of expertise in. I did a religion video because I studied religion a lot. When I was 18 years old, I went to a seminary in Louisiana and was very close to becoming a Jesuit priest. I studied law, so reviewing CRT was right in my wheelhouse. I have a degree in government with a focus on security and international relations. Can you tell I went to college right after 9/11? So when I did videos on international relations or politics, I can pull from my educational background. I don't usually make videos on D&D character builds or homebrew stuff because that really isn't my expertise. I haven't made many characters since 2nd edition, as I've been the forever DM for my groups for the past 25 years. I also like stealing from more well-versed folks who actually work in game design. I love researching. I learned how to during my studies. I learned how to be analytical, mostly in college and law school, but I'm not perfect. And I'd like to dive into topics that don't necessarily tie back with my education. I'm not saying that you shouldn't watch your favorite YouTubers, or that their content cannot provide amazing information. Some of these videos can be life-changing. Some just show you how to make your D&D game a little bit more fun. The point is to look at these videos, or any information that you receive in media, social or mainstream, with an analytical eye. Never take what I, or anyone else says, for granted. We could be wrong. Our biases show in our work. Anyone who claims to be unbiased is lying to you. The best I can do, in my opinion, is to wear my biases on my sleeve, so that you can factor that in when you review my work. Think before you retweet. Think before you regurgitate someone else's take. Think before you react. Just think. Thanks for watching.
Hey folks, thanks so much for watching the video. I really appreciate the patience that you all have shown with me with this past few months. I know this video is late. I've been dealing with an issue with Envato Elements that has been stupendously annoying, but back on track, making videos, and I swear to you, next couple of videos will be tabletop role-playing adjacent. So thank you so much. I want to call out a special thank you to my patrons, obviously especially Les Howie, Caleb Lackey, and Sidekick. Your support helps this thing keep going. So if you could, please do the normal thing. Like, comment, share it around, and thank you so much for coming back and watching the video.
Allegedly.
We like this all the time.